Yachtmaster Shorebased Pilotage page 29 question 5. And remember, pilotage is the art of navigating in confined waters. So it's using all resources, but primarily visual. Radar is also very important. You need to be prepared and have your notes done. I've shown you 2 examples here on the screen. The big one is a diagram of the entrance to Kinsale with notes written there, and the small one is exactly the same pilotage plan written in table format, or rolling road format is another one. So you need to brief your crew so they can read the pilotage plan as well. You need to be able to hand the pilotage plan to somebody else on the boat and ask them to execute it while you go and make yourself a cup of tea or use the heads or take a nap or a phone call or whatever. And the whole thing about pilotage plans is run from the cockpit or the deck or the console. It's not run from the chart table. So you can't be using books and charts here. You've got to have it out into separate and disposable notes, you know, if it's out in the wet. What I tend to do is print them or handwrite them on 200 gram card, kind of a stiff paper, and put them in sandwich bags, and it's a bit more robust. And I photograph with my phone as well, so if it blows overboard or something, I still have a pilotage plan. Pilotage is all about decision making, so it's not running down to the chart table to have a look as you approach a buoy. It needs sharp observation, so use the crew. This is a great question, and it should be looked at in conjunction with the passage making question 8. They fit hand and glove into each other, and it's a super question preparing for the assessment. So we're going to be piloting into Parvin Sound. So part A, I'm going for an open water waypoint given there, and I'm going to the approach waypoint, which is on page 63 of the almanac, into Parvin Sound, and I'm doing it on the 29th of September, so it's just the last it's the last month of daylight saving time, and I'm at my first waypoint at 10:20. My boat speed, you can choose 6, 12 or 18. I'm actually going to do it in all 3 just as a demo, but you can choose any one of those 3. And you need to identify the waypoints, the distances, the tidal streams and currents, passage time, your height at tide plus your safety margins for late and early, particularly your arrival port, your shipping traffic, any regs and any hazards to avoid. So initially, when I know I'm going to do a bit of pilotage, I'll immediately open up the page in the almanac, page 63, and it's giving me the chart of Parvin and some text on the left with really good information about how to get in there. I'll be using this particularly in part B, but I'll use my approach waypoint in part A, and there it is. So let's plot that in. So there's my initial waypoint and there's my second waypoint up in Parvin Sound. So that's my route here. So I have a few options on this route. Now you may choose a different route, and this will be perfectly valid. As long as you stand over the route, you have your ways of verifying your position and you're clear of hazards, your route will be as good as mine. I'm just happen to show you one route. Yours may vary quite substantially. So I'm going to pick my first waypoint somewhere south of Robinson Rock. I'm not that keen on going inside Robinson Rock because I'm concerned about the Cohen Rock, but I don't want to go too far south because I tip into the Falls Deep Channel where there's a lot of shipping. So I want to be close enough to the Robinson Rock, but not that close. So I'd like to put myself nice and clear of it, a couple of cables south on the 50-meter contour, and I can do that by the bearing line of 006 onto the Cape Balshaw light is effectively a transit. Now I can't really see the rock unless it's breaking in heavy water, but that and the 30-meter contour, and I can check that bearing line by looking through the gap here of the land there at South Falls. Then you've the gap between there and Swifta, and at the other side of the gap you've Huckle Head and Sinka, and you should just barely see the gap between those islands. And also you have a tower there, or a chimney of 50 meters high, so it'll be visible during the day. Remember, this is a day passage, but I've done my notes in a way that you could use it for a night passage as well. So that's a good place to plonk my first waypoint, waypoint 2. Then I'm choosing to cross the Deep Falls Channel now. You could choose to go up towards Swifta and cross later. The reason I'm choosing to cross early is we've got a concentration of traffic up towards the Hiscock Sound, and I don't want to be crossing there with tankers in a narrow space because we've got the Sinka oil terminal there. So there's going to be a lot of traffic there. So looking at crossing early, I'm going to go across to the Guillemot Island, and I'm going to go west of Guillemot Island. You may choose to go south of Guillemot and then go up the South Douglas Sound. I'd be pretty happy with that as well. It's just as good. I'm just choosing this one. So the key thing at Yachtmaster level is you're making your own smart decisions. My waypoint 3 is nicely on the transit on the south head and the southern end of Guillemot Light, and you could use that at night as well because they're both lit, but it's easy to use during the day. And my next waypoint, and I'm using contours all the time, is on the Cinca fairway with the northeastern edge of Cinca Island, which should be clearly distinguished. Even with this small island in the background, you should be able to, even if you're tipping on that small island instead, you're not going to be far out, and that gives you a nice transit. And I'm going to sneak across the channel here over onto the 50-meter contour, and I can verify that with the a transit on the Cinca fairway buoy, and the edge of Swifte Island, or onto this East Cardinal, or this light here. But that light's only a directional light, probably not going to be visible during the day, but it gives me a pretty good transit there. I can use one or two of those options, or even now on the southern end of Cinca Island. So again, you're looking through one of these gaps, so that's pretty good. And then I just creep up along the coast, and I plug in the other waypoints using the other chart. So my first leg is 118 degrees 10 miles, my second leg is 5.4 miles, my third leg 1.8, 1.9, 1.6, and so on. And I'm going to flip over now onto the next chart. So I'm zooming in a bit. This is chart 4F coming into the Hare Sound. So I've already got waypoint 5 in, and then I'm looking at waypoint 6. It's off Evans Head. Now I've put it on the edge of the sector light, not terribly relevant during the day, but it does allow you to convert this pilotage plan to use at night. So I just have a bearing line there. I can visually see I'm close to the coast. I'm looking at the depth. So I'm going to tip up along the 30-meter contour there, and my next one I can confirm that with a very obvious, there's a beacon on a lump of rock there. It's an isolated danger mark against the Calf of Cinca, the northeast end of Calf of Cinca. That gives me a nice transit and onto the 30-meter contour, and I'm visually can see the coast anyway because I'm told I've good viz, and that gives me the second last waypoint, and I'm given the last waypoint. And there's my mileages: 1.6, 0.3, 0.8 and 1.0, giving me a total mileage from waypoint 1 to 9 at 22.8. You might have it as low as 21.5, you might have it as high as 25. That's all good, but don't make sure you're not going out into shipping lanes here. What I love about 6 knots, 6 knots is the magic speed, no maths involved. So 228 minutes at 6 knots, because it's 22.8 miles. Remove the decimal point, I get 228 minutes. That's why 6 knots is so beautiful. So if I've traveled 1.8 miles at 6 knots, remove the decimal place, I've done it's taken me 18 minutes. Or likewise, if I'm told that I've been traveling for 16 minutes, I know I've done 1.6 miles. So there's no maths involved at 6 knots. You just remove or add a decimal place. So 22.8 miles, remove the decimal point, gives me 228 minutes. And that's an hour. 3 hours is 180 minutes, so 3 hours 48 at 6 knots. Half the time at 12 knots, so it's 1 hour 54, and 1/3 of the 6 knot time at 18 knots gives me 1 hour 16, but not accounting for the tidal stream. So remember that time, 3:48. So I'm now going to look at tidal streams. Of course I use Victoria, and I've looked at Victoria time. I've added an hour for summer, and I've rounded it to 1550 just for easiness here. The range is 2.4, so I'm going to use the NEAP figures. So looking at page 13 and 14 of the Tidal Stream Atlas, and you should have this beside you as I talk here, you're looking at high water -5, page 14, and back to high water -6, page 13. So on page 13, high water -6, we've a foul or an adverse tide, and we've a favourable tide an hour later. So convention is that my favourable tide starts halfway between the two at high water -5.5. Likewise, between at page 20 I have a favourable tide, page 21 I have a foul tide, that's high water +2. Therefore convention says I have my tide turns at 1720, so I have a favourable tide from 1020 to 1720, and it's no coincidence that this trip is starting at 1020. So I'm going to look at 6 knots. You only need to look at one speed. I'm going to do all three. I'm going to look at it in 1 hour blocks, because the hours on the tidal stream atlas are approximately 6 miles apart, so that makes it nice and easy. So at high water -5, page 14, I've got 0.7 and 1.3. Well, 0.7 is the neap speed, 0.7 knots, plus my boat speed of 6 knots gives me 6.7. Now, I'm not messing around with directions or anything like that. He's going in the same direction as I am, give or take a few degrees. So I'm not going to bother with course to steer or any of that. I'm just going to add the two together. It'll be so close that it'll be lost in the rounding errors. So that gives me 6.7. So I achieved 6.7 miles in the first hour, and that means I've 16.1 to go. The second hour, I'm using a different tidal block, and I'm going into high water -4, page 15, and you can see I have 1.1 knots, so it's giving me an achieved speed over the ground of 7.1. 13.8 completed so far. That's my existing 6.7 plus 7.1. I've 13.8, and I've only 9 to go. My third hour, I'm up into the Sound, and I'm using a 1 knot tidal speed here, so that's 7 knot achieved. So 7 plus 13.8 is 20.8, only 2 to go. My fourth hour, and I'm going to use two bits of tidal information here. So if I look at the almanac, page 63, it tells me the tide at the entrance to the bay is 1.5 in springs. And looking elsewhere on the tidal stream atlas, I can see that in this area a neap tide is about half the speed of a spring tide. So for argument's sake, I'm saying that it's 0.8 of a knot in neaps. But also, and it's hidden behind my head there, on the high water -2, it shows that it's 1 knot coming up through the channel. So I take the average of 1 and 0.8, it gives me 0.9, which is an achieved 6.9 knots. But I only have 2 miles to do, so 2 miles at 6.9 gives me the ballpark of 17 minutes. At 6.9 knots, yeah, 17 minutes. Right, so add that to the 3 hours. So the first hour, the second hour, the third hour, that's 180 minutes, plus 17 is 197 minutes for that journey, which is 3 hours and 17 minutes at 6 knots, gives me an ETA of 13:37. And note that earlier I had noted that the travel time was 3:48. So traveling with the tide is saving me the bones of half an hour here. And that's quite pronounced at 6 knots. It won't be as pronounced at 12 knots. So same crack here, except this time I'm doing it in half-hour blocks. So the first half hour I'm going to use page 14, and I'm also going to use the same page for the second half hour, but I'm going to use different tidal vectors. So the first half hour, favourable tide at 0.7, so it's 12.7 knots. In half an hour, that's 6.35, so 16.45 to go. I'm on the same page for the second half hour, but I'm using this tidal vector down here, but by coincidence, it's the same speed, so it's 12.7 knots, so it's another 6.35, and the existing 6.35 is 12.7 completed so far, 10.1 to go. The third half hour, I'm flipping over to page 15. And now I'm in a bit of a hole here, so I could use the 0.7 down here, I could use the 1.1 up here, I could use the 0.8 here. I'm just choosing to use the 0.8. Again, if I'm 0.1 or 0.2 out, it's not going to make a significant difference here. So I'm achieving a 12.8. That's 6.4 in half an hour. Add that to the 12.7 achieved, gives me a 19.4 achieved in 1.5 hours. So therefore 3.7 to go. The fourth half hour, I look at this. I'm going to use the 0.8 here for the first part. But as we come up into this channel, we read that it's as I said earlier, it's 1.5 springs. I call it 0.8 at neaps. The average 0.8 and 0.8 is 0.8. So it gives me an achieved 12.8 knots, but I'm only using it for 3.7 miles. So that's 17 and a bit, call it 18 minutes rounded up. So therefore add my first half hour, my second half hour, my third half hour, that's 90 minutes, plus 18, that's 108 minutes, which is 1 hour and 48 minutes at 12 knots. So an ETA of 12:08 accounting for the tidal stream. Similarly for 18 knots, but this time I'm using 1/3 of an hour or 20-minute blocks. So for the first 20 minutes, high water -5, I'm achieving 18.7 knots. The second one, I'm using the same page, but a different tidal stream, 0.7, happens to be the same. So I've achieved 12.46 in the first within 40 minutes, 10.34 to go. And the third one, I'm going to use the same page again, but this time I'm going to use this 0.4 because I'm coming up into the sound, so I'm not getting much of a speed gain. So it's only 6.13 in the 20 minutes. Add that to the 12.46 achieved so far, gives me 18.59 completed in the first hour. So while I'm doing a nominal 18 knots, I'm actually achieving 18.5 knots. So I'm not getting the big tidal gain that I'm getting at 6 knots. So I've only 4.2 to go. And this time I'm going to flip over to the next page, high water -4, but also the note on the tidal stream. I'm going to estimate here that it's going through at 0.4. And 0.4 plus 18 is 18.4. So in the 20 minutes, sorry, I'm achieving 4.21 miles. It'll take me at 12.8 knots, 14 minutes. You could have a different figure there, but you're not going to be out more than a minute or two from me. Again, it's about making your decisions and understanding why not having it absolutely bang on. But it does give me an ETA of 11:34, so I can use that to prepare for the tides, etc., going into Parvin Sound. So it's an hour and 14 minutes. Right, so now I need to look at the Parvin Sound. I have to look at a few options depending on my times. So the standard port here is Port Fraser. So Port Fraser in the morning has a low water of 1.1, a high water in the afternoon 1610 UT. I'm keeping it in UT at 3.6, and the evening low water, or the nighttime low water, 1.2. So Parvin, I add 0.6 to the first low water. I don't want to add anything in terms of meters to the high water, but I do subtract 31 minutes and I add 0.6. And if you go back and look at the material we did on secondary ports, you can see how I did that. I've just taken a shortcut here. But remember, I'm leaving it in UT. So therefore, my high water time at Parvin is 1610 minus 31 minutes, which is 1539 UT. Now I convert to DST. I leave it in UT till the conversion is done. So converting my heights, I have low water 1.7, high water around 1640. I've rounded it off a minute. DST at 3.6, low water 1.8. So they're my three tides, and I can plot through that curve to give me my arrival time. So my arrival time at 6 knots is 1340, which is high water -3, which it's going to be half tide. So even just visually looking at it, it's going to be halfway between 1.7 and 3.6. So it's going to be around 2.6 knot. 2.6 is the tide at the high water -3 arrival time. The 12 knot, I'm arriving at a lower tide, which is high water -4.5. You have to plot that through the curve. And likewise, the earliest arrival time is 11:34, which is high water -5. So I'd look at the curve and I'd have my curve plotted so I can look at it regularly. I'm not going to demonstrate it here as we've done the curve enough times. If you're worried about the curve, go back to some of the tidal curve stuff we did earlier in the course. Right, so here's my pilotage. I'm going to look at how I clear the various lines. So that's the route I put in. Now, the first concern is Robinson Rock. Now, I don't want to just rock up to Robinson Rock, no pun intended, and find that I'm there. So I set up a couple of clearing lines. I haven't got the bearings written in there, but you're looking at here as approximately 20 degrees here. So you're keeping an eye on Cape Balshaw, and once you're inside the 20-degree line, you have to be careful. You're in the danger zone, and likewise, you come up to your waypoint. You know you're at the waypoint by the bearing line I showed earlier, and you know you're clear of the danger area by, say, a bearing of that looks like about 350 degrees. I've just kept it simple to avoid clutter, but you have those clearing bearings. You need to watch the shipping here, so this is why we're taking the pane early and crossing earlier. And then as we come up into chart 4, we have the shipping again, and we need to have a plan to keep out of the precautionary area. Now, you've got to stay out of that precautionary area, or there's a rolling prohibition zone when there's tankers in there. Good practice to stay out of it all the time. This is a busy oil terminal. There's always going to be tankers there, or you could be in it and suddenly a tanker appears at the far end. So good practice, stay out of it. So the way we're staying out of it is just hugging the shoreline in there around Evans Head, and as we come up around into Parvin Sound. So we're coming on to part B, and we're going to have a look at the pilotage. So there's a few notes there. The one to really watch is we've a 14 meter, as 14 meters above hat, wire to get through. So we have to check, can our boat clear that? And this is copied from the RYA. This is a visual pilotage plan that similar to the one I showed you from Conseil earlier. So have a look at this and study it. It's in the slides, in the PDF slides, and it just takes you through. It's got various clearing lines. I would have probably used as a directional line here, which is to lead you into this harbour. Now it only switches on occasionally, but it does give you a clearing line as you come into the more dangerous areas. And it's got the various positions there. Just one criticism of this, it's got colours, which is great for use during the day, but if you use these with a red torch at night, that red will totally disappear. So for nighttime, just use monochrome. There is another version. You could have the rolling road. If you have a past history as a rally driver, you might like this one, or as a rally navigator. And there's my waypoints. Now they're slightly different than ones I had, but again, you can choose your own, and it's the various clearing lines and notes. It's just a different way of doing it. So practice your own system. The main thing is that everybody on the boat understands it and the writing is very clear. So that's pilotage.